Man, I am so honored that you are here. And something that you need to know about me is that I am an inquisitive person. I ask questions all the time, and sometimes I ask questions that get me in trouble. Especially now, but even more so when I was young. I used to ask questions that got me in trouble all the time because I just didn't know I wasn't supposed to ask some of these questions. Like one of the questions that I would ask when I was a kid was I would ask adults how much they got paid. And apparently you're not supposed to ask adults how much they got paid. But I wanted to know because I was doing my research, right? Like as a kid, I'm trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life? What kind of career do I want to go into? And I wanted to know, did it make any money? Because I don't want to spend my time going to school, learning something, going to this career, and then I didn't get paid anything. So I became a pastor. And so you can see I didn't really do my research on that. But and I'll tell you, man, being a pastor is not a good career, but it's a great calling, and it's not something that people go into for the money. And I want to let you know too, if you're a Christian, you are called into ministry. Every single person who follows Jesus, you're called into ministry, and it might not be full-time ministry like what I do, but you are called into ministry. God has called you not to sit in a seat, but to make a difference. You have been called into ministry. But I would ask this question when I was a kid, how much do you make? And again, I found out that I'm not supposed to ask that, so I would get in trouble at times asking adults how much they got paid. But another question that I would ask oftentimes when I was a kid is why? Why? I constantly asked why because I wanted to know why. And then I had kids, and they started asking the question, why? And I think that was all payback from all the times I would ask why. And after a while, I just because it just is. And I don't always have the answer for why. They'd be asking why. And oftentimes we ask questions, and sometimes we don't have answers to those questions, which is why we're doing this series, Questions You Don't Ask in Church, because maybe you got some questions, and you're looking for some answers, and you hadn't gotten some answers, or maybe some answers hadn't really satisfied, and so you're wondering about this question that you have, but sometimes we feel like, I don't know if I can really ask that question, or I don't know who to ask, or is it okay to ask that question in church? I want to let you know it is okay for you to ask those questions, and it's good for you to ask those questions. And what we're going to do throughout this series is we're going to ask some of these questions that we often don't ask in church, and we're going to find some answers as well. And so what we did throughout this series is we let you build this series. We sent out surveys. We said, what are some of the questions that you want to ask in church that you feel like you can't ask in church, or some of the questions that you want to ask that you want answers to? And then you responded, and you gave us a bunch of the questions that you want to ask. And so we have the top 3 questions that you asked that form this series. And so next week, we're going to answer the second most asked question, which there were a bunch of questions that came in around this, but they boiled down to this. Am I really a Christian, or am I going to hell? So we're going to talk about that next week. The third week of this series, we're going to answer the most asked question that you asked, which is, what does God think about LGBTQIA plus and pronouns? And so that's the third week of this series, so not next Sunday, but the following Sunday. And unfortunately, I'm going to be sick that weekend. So we're going to find somebody who can answer that question for you. But there's that one. And then today, we're going to answer the third most popular question you asked, which is true? Is it evolution? Is it creation? Or is it both? And does it even matter what I believe? And so that's what we're going to tackle today. And I love this question about evolution and creation because last week, Tim, my coach and also the head of my oversight team, he came and preached for us. And a thing that he referred back to was Genesis. So he preached from Genesis and the creation account. And sometimes when we hear about creation, when we hear about Genesis, we may hear it in church, or it's just kind of mentioned like, it was a thing that happened. But the question that we wonder is it real? Is it true? Can I really believe the scriptural account for creation? Or is it just a myth and a fairy tale and some story somebody made up about how we got here? And so this is crucial, I think, when it comes to how we understand ourselves and who we are. Because the truth is this, your life is made up of the stories that you tell yourself, the stories that have been told to you, and the stories that you believe. Like your life, your reality is made up of stories you say to yourself, stories others have said to you, and stories that you believe. And those stories may be true, and they may not be true. But whether or not those stories are true or fictional, those stories shape your life and how you live. You are who you are based on the stories that you tell yourself and the stories that you believe, whether or not they're true. I'll give you some examples. Maybe you don't have a job. And this is the story that you say, I don't have a job because there are no jobs. Nobody's hiring. I'm underqualified. I'm undereducated. I send in applications. Nobody gets back to me. Nobody's hiring. There's no way that I can get a job. I'm just not cut out for it. And what happens is you're telling yourself the story of a victim. And so you live a victim reality. Somebody else may be facing the exact same situation, but they tell themselves a different story. I don't have a job, so I'm going to do whatever it takes to get a job. I'm going to create a job. I'm going to make myself stand out. I'm not just going to fill out an application online. I'm going to go in and meet them and make myself stand out. And based on that story they tell themselves, a story of a go-getter, somebody who's going to take things into their own hands, their reality changes. See, the story we tell ourselves shapes how we live. Maybe somebody hurt you, somebody wronged you. And because you were so wounded, you decide to put up your defenses. And now whenever somebody wounds you or violates your trust or breaks that in you, you snap at them, you go off on them, and then you tell the story, this person did this, and then I laid into them, I let them have it, because I'm not gonna take anything from anybody, and I let them know that. And then what happens, because of this story that you're telling yourself, because of the barriers you put in place to try and protect yourself from a good place, because you don't want to be hurt again, you begin to tell this story, you begin to live in such a way where you let your anger spill out in unhealthy and toxic ways, and you become unapproachable. And now people don't want to be around you because they're afraid of you. But they're afraid of you because of the story that you tell yourself, I don't want to be hurt again, and if I'm not going to be hurt again, I need to respond with toxic anger. I need to put up walls and barriers, and that creates the reality that you have. Maybe the story that you tell yourself is one where you just say, I don't have any friends, nobody wants to be around me, nobody calls me, nobody makes time for me, and you begin to tell yourself this story that nobody likes you and they don't want to be around you, and you have this like Eeyore mentality. And what happens is the story that you're telling yourself, people don't have time, they don't like me, they don't want to reach out to me, they don't call me. What happens is that story starts to shape your reality because you become a wet blanket of a person and nobody wants to be around you. And then you point to the evidence that you see in your life. Nobody wants to be around you. And you're like, that's why, it's because, blah, blah, blah. And what happens is the story you're telling yourself is shaping your reality. And then you point to that reality and say, that's why the story is true. See what I'm saying? The story we tell ourselves shape our reality. And then when we start to look at the reality of our life, the evidence and the facts, we can then look and say, see, that's why that story is true. But if we just tell ourselves a different story, we'll see a different reality. So the stories we believe shape our lives. And this is also true when it comes to the story of our origin, how we got here. See, whether you believe in creation or evolution, whichever story you choose to believe in, there are certain evidences and facts that we can all agree on. Like we can look around and we can see that there's a world. There's a planet, there's a solar system, there's galaxies, there's sun, moon, stars, rocks, there's birds, there's plants, there's giraffes and opossums and duck-billed platypuses and matter and cells and all this stuff. So we can see this and we know that it's real. It's evidence, it's fact. We all agree that this stuff is real and it's here. But then the question is, how did it get here? How did we end up here? How did all this happen? And this is where the story part comes in. We then formulate stories on how it all happened. And there's this one story about the creation of it all. That in the beginning, God created all things. That he spoke all things into existence. This is one story. But then another story is that millions and millions and millions of years ago, billions of years ago, there was this big bang. And from this big bang came all of what we see. And what happened was, and by the way, just given the time that we have, I have to gloss over some things. I can't get really deep into some of this. But from this big bang, came all these different galaxies and planets, and then there was this one planet that that was suitable for life. And from this pool of primordial ooze, something started moving around in there. And then that thing grew gills and fins and legs over millions and millions of years. And then it crawled out of there. And then it morphed into all of what we see in life. And so there's this other story. It's a story of evolution. Again, that's simplified, but this is a story. And maybe you hear this and you say, okay, wait, hold on. You keep talking about story. Like, I understand the creation story. I mean, that's a story. Somebody wrote it down. Nobody was really there. So they made this story up, and like, that's a religious thing for religious people. Okay, creation, I get it. That's a story. But you keep saying evolution, the evolutionary story. Like, evolution isn't a story. It's science. But the truth is, evolution isn't science. It's a story. It's a story that's made to seem like science. And I just want to refresh our memory of what science is. And so I'm going to take you back real quick to our 6th grade science class, all right? In 6th grade science class, here's what my 6th grade science teacher taught me. And also here's what dictionary.com says the definition of science is. Here it is. Science is a systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation, I see something, and experimentation. So I see something and I experiment to see if that's true. And so this is science. Now there's some problems with evolution in that we can't really experiment on it. Because if you remember back in 6th grade science class, we talked about the scientific method. And so the scientific method looks like this, where I have an observation, I see something, and then I ask a question about it. I wonder why this is. And then I formulate a hypothesis. Here's what I think based on what I see and the questions that I'm asking. Now, to see if that hypothesis is true or not, I'm going to run some experiments on this. And then after the experiments, I'm going to gather data from that. And then I'm going to refine, alter, expand, reject, or accept my hypothesis. So I saw this, I had some questions about it, I formulated a hypothesis. Here's what I think is true. Now I'm going to run some experiments to see if it really is true. I did the experiments, I collect the data, I look at the data, and I allow the data to refine, alter, expand, reject, or accept my hypothesis. Oh my goodness, I did this experiment, and it turns out that what I believed was true because the data shows it. I did this experiment and come to find out, the thing I believed isn't true at all because the data suggests something else. And so I'm going to change how I think based on what the experiment said, the data from the experiment said. And then I come to a conclusion, and then from there I'm able to develop a theory. Now, a theory isn't proven. I got to do a lot more experiments and things like that, but at least I'm on the right track. And so this is the scientific method. The problem with evolution is we can't subject it to the scientific method. The problem with the origin of life is we can't subject it to the scientific method because none of us were there. We can't go back and recreate life from nothing. We look around and we can't see evidences of macroevolution where a cat becomes a giraffe, or a frog becomes a lizard, or a monkey becomes a person. We just can't experiment on that. We can look at the fossil record, but even when we look at the fossil record, and even as we look around today, we don't see the evidence that we need to conclude macroevolution is a real thing. Now, we do see microevolution, and this falls in line with creation. Microevolution are small changes, but a bird is still a bird. A bug is still a bug. In microevolution, we see examples where mosquitoes and whiteflies develop resistance to pesticides, where sparrows in the north are larger than sparrows in the south. And really, maybe that's not even microevolution, it's just survival of the fittest, because larger birds are going to survive better in colder environments than smaller birds, and so the smaller birds just died out. And so it's the bigger birds that survive, and then they pass on the genes to be bigger birds in the north. So we can see evidence of microevolution, but when it comes to macroevolution, the evidence is lacking, and I'll dive into that in a moment. But when it comes to evolution, evolution really is a story that we come up with, because what happens is we look at the evidence, we look at the facts, we look at all the things we know and see, and we say, how did this get here? How did this happen? And there are some who say, I know exactly how it happened. God created it. That's the story that we believe. Others say, no, we know how it happened. It's evolution. And that's the story we believe. But when it comes to how we got here, our origins, creation, evolution, it's all a story that we tell ourselves based on the evidence and the facts that we see. And the truth is, two different people can look at the same evidence, look at the same facts, and come up with two different stories. The problem is we can't go back and run experiments and recreate macroevolution or recreate our origin. And so it really is a story. And the question is, which story is right? Because the story, and here's why this matters. The story we believe about how we got here shapes how we live here and now. And you'll notice too that evolution is a theory, not a law, so it's a guess. Just like creation is a guess. So the question is, which story is the one that we're going to believe? Which story is one that makes the most sense? And here's the deal. I want to be like you. I don't want to believe a story that's not real. Like, I want to believe a story that's real. I want to believe a story that's true. So is there evidence for creation that helps me better understand that it's true? And again, it matters what story we believe about our origin, because what you believe about where you came from will guide where you go. What you believe about where you came from will guide where you go. And so what I want to do today may feel kind of like the Matrix, right? Where like, I'm going to just bust into your life and say, hey, there's this whole other thing that's going on, right? Because the thing that most of us were taught growing up is that evolution is right. That's how we got here. There was this sextillion-ton pinprick with all the cataclysmic energy that contains all the matter, time, and mass of all the galaxy, of all the universe, of all things, and it exploded, and from there came what we see. And then what happened is out of nothing came something. And there's all sorts of different theories on the origin of life, and we've seen all this stuff growing up. And so what I'm doing is I'm kind of busting onto the scene, and I'm saying, hey, there's a whole other explanation. There's a whole other way that leads to a different kind of life here and now, because what you believe about your past will determine your future and where you're headed. It alters the way that you live here and now. And so I just want to share some things with you, hopefully to cause you to question maybe some of what you were told, and to see that there is another way that is believable, that is backed by evidence, and it's not as far-fetched as you might think. And so as we look at evolution and creation, again, given the amount of time we have, I don't have time to go into all the but what ifs and answer all the questions and things like that. So here's what I want to invite you to do. This Wednesday at noon, I'm going to do a Facebook Live on the Journey page, talking more about creation and evolution, diving more into some of the evidences and also answering some of your questions on that. So I want to invite you to join me live this Wednesday as we talk more about it. But today I just want to hit on some things. We're going to gloss over some things. And again, I just want to pique your interest in this and hopefully answer some questions that you might have. And so when it comes to evolution, this is the predominant theory that a lot of us have been taught in school, and maybe some of us just believe because there's so much evidence behind it. And chances are, growing up, you saw something like the tree of life. And so what evolution says is that out of nothing came something. Creation says the same thing. Out of nothing came something. But with evolution, what happened, one of the predominant theories is that our world was this violent, chaotic place millions and millions and millions of years ago, which, by the way, creation says that God created all things in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. And we can look around at the evidence in the world and we can see, okay, yeah. However, if you don't believe in God, you got to come up with an explanation about how we all got here. And this is where evolution comes from. What evolution says is that Again, this sextillion-ton pinprick of cataclysmic energy that contained all the matter, mass, and time that would ever exist exploded from this big bang. Millions of galaxies were created, and those galaxies exist. We can see those. But then there's this planet where life could be formed, and one predominant theory on the origin of life is that our world was this violent, chaotic place, lightning, storms, just crazy, and there were all the elements for life present here on earth, but it needed a spark. And so from these violent storms that were going on, lightning strikes all over, that provided the energy that was needed to fuse these elements of life, and life began. Kind of like the story of Frankenstein. Life began, something started moving around, amoebas were created and formed. Life began in these pools of primordial ooze, and then as time went on, millions and millions of years, because for evolution to actually happen, you need a lot of time for this gradual change to take place. Over time, this life became more complex, and these beings started to form gills and fins and legs, and eventually that thing that was moving around for millions and millions of years in all these different pools, all these different things eventually moved out onto land, and then grew a tail, and then climbed up in a tree, and that's your great, 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 great grandfather. That's where you came from. It's a little far-fetched, I know, but this is what evolution says. And so we have the tree of life here that shows us where everything came from. But the question at the bottom is origin of life. How did that happen? We'll dive into that. And so maybe you've seen something like this, that everything came from nothing. And then we see this right here. This is kind of the evolutionary spectrum here. We came from monkeys, and over millions of years we evolved to what we are now. But there's other versions of this chart as well. Yeah, and then here's another one. So you can just kind of see how we've evolved. And then here's another one. Yeah, zombies are the next phase. They're coming. It's coming. Yeah. So we see some of these different charts that have been created to help us see how evolution happens. But here's what we find from evolution. If we boil it down to this. So evolution is a theory, but a fact that we find from this theory is this. If evolution is true, if evolution is real, then you and I are accidents. You and I are accidents. We are a cosmological accident. We just happen to be on a planet that sustains life. We came out of nowhere. We have no purpose. We have no greater sense of being. We're just accidents. We're accidents that came from a lightning strike. We're accidents that happened from this big explosion, and we just happen to be here. And as an accident, you have no value, no worth, or anything to me. I don't care about you because you're an accident, I'm an accident, so I'm just going to look out for me. When we follow evolution, it leads us to a place where there is no morality. I mean, if we really boil it down and we really think about it, like you and I are accidents, we just happen to be here. And so since I'm here, I care about me first and foremost. To hell with you, because you're an accident too. Why should I care about you? Because you're an accident. You got no purpose. You weren't made in the image of a creator. Who cares? Now life becomes all about me. And you know people who live that way. Selfish, self-centered. But this is what evolution leads us to. And so if we subscribe to evolution, again, where we came from shapes who we are now and where we're going. That's a conclusion we can come to. We're all just accidents, so who cares? What's the purpose? What's the big deal? And it's okay for me to be lazy. It's okay for me to be lethargic. It's okay for me to not make anything with my life because it doesn't matter anyway. I'm not called to more. I don't need to discover the more I was made for. Who cares? So evolution can lead us there. Another problem with evolution is this. It doesn't answer the question of how it all started in the first place. Like a good story has to have a really good, cohesive beginning. And evolution starts off saying that there was this big bang and then everything just happened. But the problem with the beginning of the story of evolution is that it violates the second law of thermodynamics. See, the second law of thermodynamics says this, that things go from complex to simple. Things go from orderly to chaotic. Second law of thermodynamics, maybe you remember from Jurassic Park, Malcolm explained it, the second law of thermodynamics. But it's this idea that everything goes from complex to simple, from organized to chaotic, not what evolution says. Evolution says there was chaos, this big bang, swirling, violent, chaotic storms on this planet, life, very simple life beginning, now being more complex. Evolution goes against the law of the second law of thermodynamics. Evolution essentially says that there's a tornado that hits a lumber yard, and in the aftermath of the tornado, a house is built. Evolution gives us a picture that there's a storm in a paint shop, and after the storm, the Mona Lisa is created. The idea is that it goes from chaos to order, but the second law of thermodynamics says, no, that's not the case. Things start out simple or complex and orderly and break down, and you've seen this in your life. As we get older, our bodies break down. Every car that has ever been made is in a junkyard or will be in a junkyard. It breaks down. Everything breaks down, but evolution comes in and says, no, we're going to fight the law, the second law of thermodynamics, and say that's not the case. Evolution actually goes against what science says. Another problem with evolution is identifying how life originated. Like, how did life get here in the first place? And again, there's different theories on how life first originated, but the one popular one is that there were pockets of primordial soup with all the ingredients necessary for life. Lightning struck and life began. Again, similar to the story of Frankenstein. There's other theories like life originated off the backs of crystals or from clay. This is known as clay theory. There's other theories on how life began here on earth, and some of them don't even include anything that we see here on earth, but some of them do, like life came from ocean vents, life came from glaciers, the matter within glaciers and ice, and all kinds of different theories. But all these theories essentially say that life came from non-life, that there was no living thing, and then from non-life came life. Again, the problem with this is it goes against science, because what we discovered 400 years ago from Francesco Redi's work on spontaneous generation is that life comes from life. Life does not come from non-life. And so maybe you remember seeing the experiment that Redi conducted where he took several different jars and he put meat in them. See, people believed 400 years ago that life came from non-life, that maggots came from rotting meat. But Redi did this experiment and he showed that actually life comes from life. And so this law of spontaneous generation lets us know life comes from life, not non-life. Now, if life came from non-life, you know what that would be? A miracle. The story of creation explains that. Life coming from non-life is either ridiculous or miraculous. The story of creation says it's miraculous. Evolution has a hard time explaining how life came to be. There actually is no real good explanation on how life happened. Now, there is one explanation that some scientists believe, and it's that we got here by aliens. Really, it's called panspermia. And the idea is that aliens started life here. Some other theories in panspermia are that organic life from other planets got here through a meteor crash or something like that. But what you see is that when scientists are pressed to come up with how life happened here on Earth, some go to aliens. This isn't about science. It's about how do we get here. It's all the story that we share. And by the way, as we talk about science, I want to let you know I'm not against science. Science is a good thing. See, I actually believe that God created science and God created this world and this universe to operate in the laws of science. So it's not that science and God are opposed. No, God is the creator of science. But the truth is, not everything falls in the line of science, and that's okay, including the story of our origin. How we got here and how all this happened, it's a story. And it's okay for it to be a story. It's okay for it not to be science. Because there are things that are very real that are not science. I mean, love doesn't fall in the realm of science. How do you experiment on love? How do you do a scientific method test on love? I mean, you feel love, you know that it's real, but it's out of the realm of science. When you forgive somebody, you feel set free. But you can't run the scientific method on forgiveness. You just know it's real because you feel it and you've done it. Forgiveness, hope, desire, passion, all these things fall outside of the realm of science. And that's okay that they fall outside of the realm of science. Not everything is scientific, and not everything has to be scientific for it to be real and true. So when it comes to our origins, there's still questions that evolution hasn't found the answer to. There's other things too that evolution says that over millions of years ago, fish sprouted tiny little legs, and then over the course of more millions of years, those legs got longer, and then the fins and the tail disappeared, and then eventually those fish became frogs, and then the transformation began, and they became fully frogs. And so this is a story that takes place over millions and millions of years, macroevolution from one species to another. Now, this is the case. One species turns into another over millions and millions of years, and this happens all over the planet. Then there would be millions and millions of transitional fossils that we would see in the fossil record. We should see millions and millions of fossils of fish frogs. But we don't. The same is true for people. So the belief is that people came from monkeys. If that's the case, and this happened over millions and millions of years, then we should see millions and millions of transitional fossils of monkey people. But we don't see millions and millions of transitional fossils of monkey people. And if evolution happened, then it should still be happening, and we should see monkey people walking around today. Unless we say, no, evolution stopped. It happened until we evolved and then it stopped. That's it. But I think that's kind of arrogant to say. Like, evolution should still be going on. And if that's the case, we should have monkey people here right now. And we should be able to see them because evolution is still going on. But we don't see that. Now, you may look at some of the fossil records and point to some of the things that you learned in school, but what about Peking man? What about Homo erectus? What about Lucy? I mean, they found some of these transitional fossils again. We should see millions and millions of them in the fossil record. We don't. But let's just look at one of them, Lucy. Lucy is one of the most popular fossils that's brought up for a transitional fossil. And these are the bones that were found for Lucy. Now, you'll notice that there's a lot of bones missing. And I want to point you to the skull. We can see a jawbone there, and then we see fragments of the skull. Now, based on what you believe, you'll take these bones and fill in the gaps to make what you believe true. So here's what some scientists did. They took these few bones that we have here, I think 47 bones in all, and we see that on the left. Right here in the center, you can see all the places it's filled in. All the places the bones are filled in are in white. And I want you to notice, the hands are completely filled in. Pretty much the legs and feet, most of it. Notice the skull is all mostly white. So from a few bone fragments, artists took liberties in creating a skull. We have no idea what the eye sockets look like. We have no idea what the nose looked like, what the rest of the head looked like. But this is what was formed, again, based on what I believe. I'm going to let what I believe shape the evidence that I see. So this is what was created. And then, no, go back. Go back. And then what was created was this model. So this was Lucy. Based on the bones that we found, here's what this creature looked like. However, other scientists looked at those same bones and came up with this model. Same bones. And said, yeah, that's a monkey. Now again, I want to remember how the skull looked like and how there was so much creative liberty put into creating what the skull looked like. Using scientific modeling, one person who modeled the skull made it look like this right here. So it looks really human-like. Again, using scientific modeling and using the skull that was created from just a few fragments, they came up with this. So this looks like evidence that Lucy was a man, but or a person, but using the same scientific modeling, this same image was created, and that looks like a monkey to me. See, we got to understand that when we look at some of the evidence for evolution and creation, some of it is influenced by preconceived notions and predispositions that people have. Some people can look at those same bones and say, that's a monkey person. And other scientists look at those same bones and say, no, it's just a monkey. So, it's all about the story that you believe. Again, when it comes to transitional fossils, we should see millions and millions of transitional fossils. But we don't see that in the fossil record. Because again, this happened over millions and millions of years. There should be millions and millions of transitional fossils. So, when we look at the theory of evolution, we have to ask the question, what is the agenda? Again, the story of creation, and people believe the story of creation for thousands and thousands of years. But if I don't believe that there is a God, I need to come up with another story that explains how we got here. And evolution was a theory that was popularized by Charles Darwin. It was around before Charles Darwin, but Charles Darwin popularized it. And the question we have to ask is, what was his agenda? Or did he have an agenda? Or what was he thinking? What did he believe about the world? And did what he believed influence this theory of evolution? I'll give you an example. One of the tenets of evolution, and we do see this in the world today, is the survival of the fittest. Now, evolution plays into this even more because, again, we're all accidents if we believe evolution. So, since you're an accident, I'm an accident, it's all about survival of the fittest. The biggest, strongest wins out. And so because we're accidents, I'm going to do what I need to do to make my life better, forget you, no matter how it hurts you, no matter how it harms you. I'm going to lie, cheat, steal, do whatever I got to do so that I can survive, because in the end, the top dog wins. And evolution gives me license to just screw you over because it's survival of the fittest. Who cares? It's all about me. I want to play a game of quotes with you. I want to see if you can find out who said this. So, here's a quote. The prerequisite for improvement of the species lies not in the union of the superior and the inferior. The prerequisite for improvement, if our species is going to improve, it's not about uniting the superior and the inferior, them joining together. No, it's in the complete victory of the former. It's in the complete victory of the superior. The top wins out over the inferior. The stronger must dominate and not mix with the weaker, and thereby sacrifice its own greatness. Only the born weakling can feel this to be cruel. If you think that's cruel, survival of the fittest, me winning out over you, me dominating you, me crushing you, it's because you're weak. You're the weak one. And that's why you think it's cruel. He is indeed but a weak and limited creature. If this law did not prevail, any higher evolution of all organic life would be unthinkable. That seems like a great quote from Charles Darwin, right? But you know who said that? Hitler. Hitler used evolutionary theory as evidence as to why the Holocaust should happen. I want to read you another quote. Let's see who said this. The Western nations of Europe now so immeasurably surpass their former savage progenitors that they stand at the summit of civilization. The civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races through the world. Sounds like a good Hitler quote, huh? Look who said it. Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin. They both seem to be holding hands, don't they? This is what evolutionary theory leads to. Of course, why not dominate the weak? Why not exterminate? Because it's survival of the fittest. If I ascribe to that theory, then who cares what I do to you? Because it's all about me. And you may ask the question, so then it leads us to ask the question, well, who's right? Like who comes up with morality? Because according to evolution, we're all accidents. There's no point for morality. There's no point for kindness. There's no point for me to show grace or any of that stuff. So who comes up with morality? Because we've done away with God. And if you say, well, it's a greater society that comes up with morality, the problem with that is that there was a greater society in Germany that said, let's exterminate millions of people. If you say it's a greater society who comes up with morality and what's right and wrong, the problem with that is that we live in a society where for 400 years we said it was okay to own somebody. If the greater society comes up with what's right and wrong in morality, we're screwed. But evolutionary theory lends itself to that. It says, yeah, who cares? You're an accident anyway. And one of the biggest problems I find with evolutionary theory is this, that it's hopeless. Like I have no purpose. I have no greater meaning. I'm just an accident trying to get by. And if that's the case, why try and keep my marriage together? I'll just do whatever I want to do. If that's the case, who cares if I cuss at my kids? If that's the case, who cares how many people I sleep with? If I'm just an accident trying to get by, who cares who I screw over to get to the top? If that's the case, why should I strive for anything more? And I could understand how you could sink into depression or anxiety because who cares? We're just accidents. We're all here by happenstance. But thankfully, that's not the only story. There's another story. It's a story of hope. It's a story that says you matter. It's a story that says you were made for more. It's a story that says you have purpose. It's a story that says you are valuable. And it's a story of creation. I want to give you some examples that we see from creation that looks at the same evidence, the same facts that we see here and now, and explains them very well. See, with the story of creation, I don't have to explain how life originated. God spoke it into existence. That's how it happened. Life came from non-life. Same thing evolution says, except it's not ridiculous, it's miraculous. So I don't have to come up with a reason why we came. Again, scientists who follow evolutionary story still have trouble answering the question, how did life get here if there wasn't a creator? In creation, I don't have to battle the second law of thermodynamics because God is the one who made order out of chaos. Second law of thermodynamics, chaos does not come from, like order goes from chaos, or goes to chaos. Evolution says chaos came to order, but that's not how it works. But in creation, I can say, no, it happened because God's made it happen. God saw chaos and he brought order to it. I could look at a house and say, oh, that got there because somebody built it. I could look at a painting and say, oh, that got there because somebody painted it. I know the one who created it. So it didn't just come out of nowhere, but somebody intelligently designed it and created it and made it happen. That's an easy explanation for me. I don't have to fight a law in science to believe a theory or a story about how we got here. Creation goes right in line with the second law of thermodynamics. I can explain the lack of transitional fossils in the fossil record and even not seeing monkey people walking around today because God created everything according to their kind. God created the species that there are, and that's why we don't have millions and millions of transitional fossils from one species to another, because God created it. And I can explain a lot of other natural things that we see in the world by pointing to Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8 with the flood. There's a worldwide flood that caused chaos, and we can look around and see some of the things in the world that we see today, and it's explained by the flood. How come some fossils are in other layers of strata of the earth than others, and they really shouldn't be there, but they are? Well, it's a worldwide flood. That's it. Like, I can explain why we see some of these anomalies because of the flood. And so there's all sorts of other evidences for creation, but if we believe that God really is who he says he is, that God is all-powerful, that Jesus really did rise again from the dead, then creating the world in 6 days would be no problem for him. He should be able to do that if he's as powerful as we believe he is. And again, there's explanations as we look around at the evidence and the facts as to why we believe what we believe and how we can know that creation really is a viable story to believe in. And so my hope today is that you see that maybe evolution is a little more ridiculous than you thought, and creation might be a little more possible than you thought. And as we wrap up, I want to give you just a little more evidence for creation. Here's some evidence. One of the reasons why I also believe in creation, the creation account in Genesis, is because Jesus believed it. And this matters to the Christian because here's what we believe, that Jesus was the Son of God. And here's what Jesus said, Mark chapter 10, verses 1 through 9. Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, as was his custom, and he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "Well, what did Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Well, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "And it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will join one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." So Jesus has asked the question about marriage, and he points back to creation as a foundation for marriage. And he talked about creation kind of like it was true, like it happened. Mark 13, 18 through 19, pray that this will not take place during winter. Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple that's going to take place in 70 AD, so after Jesus would ascend. And he's talking about the destruction of the temple. He says, hey, when this happens, I want you to pray this doesn't take place in winter, because those will be the days of distress unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now and never to be equaled again. Again, he just kind of refers to creation like, yeah, it happened. And not only did Jesus believe the story of creation, but the New Testament writers also believed the story of creation. Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. So if you want to know what God looks like, just look at Jesus. If you want to know how God is, look at Jesus. And it says he existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him, through Jesus, and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. You know why Jesus believed creation was real? Because he was there. Because he did it. If he wasn't there, he wouldn't talk about creation like it was a real thing if it wasn't. But he talks about it like it was a real thing because he's like, yeah, I did it. So if you believe Jesus is who he says he is, the Son of God, God himself, why would he lie to us when he came here about this story of creation and how we got here? Finally, I believe the story of creation because creation explains who we are. Genesis 1:26-27, then God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness. Let us make mankind in our image and our likeness. You are made in the image of God. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and he breathed his breath in his nostrils, the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Creation tells us who we are. Creation tells us where we came from. Creation says that you were made in the image of God. The person you're sitting next to is made in the image of God, and because of that, they have value and they have worth. You're not an accident. You're not a mistake. You didn't just happen. You were created. You were molded. You were crafted. You have purpose and you have value according to the story of creation. According to the story of evolution, doesn't matter. Who cares if you have hope? You shouldn't, because you're an accident. But because you were made in the image of God, you matter. And you have value. And you have worth. And you have purpose. See, it's all about the story that you tell yourself. And remembering where you came from makes an impact on who you are today. And so you can be here by accident, on accident. And if that's what you believe, then your life is purposeless and pointless. So do whatever you want to do. You can believe that, or you can believe that you were created and handcrafted by God, who has a plan and a purpose for your life. That plan and purpose for your life goes beyond simply existing. He made you in his image, and so you have worth and value. So which is it? Is it evolution or creation? I don't know. It's up for you to believe. But just know whichever one you believe, it's a story. It's a story. Because we can look at the same evidence and the same facts and come to different conclusions, but it's all about the story we tell ourselves on how we got here. And I don't know about you, but I like the story that says I matter. I like the story that says I mean something. I like the story that says that you're valuable. That's the story I like better. So that's the story that I choose to believe. And it's also in creation, as we believe that we matter and we have value, that the cross makes sense. Because what the cross says is that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have eternal life. And if you're an accident, I'm not sending my Son to die for you. Who cares? But because you're made in my image, because you have meaning and purpose and value, you're worth saving. And this is why Jesus went to the cross. Because he created you in his image. And you have value and worth and meaning, so much so that he would lay down his life to forgive you and give you life. And that's what we celebrate every week as we take communion. In your chairs, there's some cups, and in those cups are a piece of bread, some juice. The bread reminds us of Jesus' body that was broken for us. The juice reminds us of his blood that was shed for us. I want to invite you, as we sing this next song, to partake in communion. And just remember, the cross has so much more significance because of creation. Because you were created in the image of God. And you have worth and value and meaning. And Jesus went to the cross to redeem you because you're worth it. You're worth it. Because you're made in his image. Would you pray with me? God, I want to thank you so much for your love, your grace, your mercy. The story of creation lets us know why we are the way we are, because sin entered the world. We were created in your image. We had a relationship with you, but Adam and Eve rebelled against you, and we rebel against you too in our own lives. But despite our rebellion, despite our flaws, you chase after us, you pursue us, and you call us by name. So as we take communion, I pray we're reminded of the love you have for us. Because you made us for more. Yeah, you made us for more. And we want to live in that more. And as we journey with you, we want to know you more. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.